entry point to Kantian deontology. And this is by comparing Kantian moral deliberation with utilitarian moral deliberation. Because now all of you are already familiar with utilitarian moral reasoning. You had the midterms on this. You were supposed to explain how utilitarian moral reasoning works, specifically how rule utilitarian moral reasoning works. And then you're supposed to apply it to a case. So you know this, right? And one of the nice or effective ways of learning is via contrast. So this afternoon, I'm going to introduce Kantian moral deliberation by comparing it with consequentialist moral deliberation. And I'll already touch on parts of the reading for Module 9. So this is a quote from Honora O'Neill's paper, Kantian Approaches to Some Famine Problems, and I will read it and then I'll explain it. So what does O'Neill say here? First, her point is, in one sense, Kantian moral deliberation is less demanding than consequentialist moral deliberation. Why? It, meaning Kantian moral deliberation, does not propose a process of moral reasoning that can, in principle, rank all possible actions or all possible institutional arrangements from the happiness-maximizing right action. It aims rather to offer a pattern of reasoning by which we can identify whether a proposed action or institutional arrangement would be just or unjust, beneficent or lacking in beneficence. I have a recording that I will release next week where I discuss the definition of beneficence, but beneficence is roughly aligned with generosity or kindness, right? So for now, that's the definition that I give. So here's the thing. I know that a lot of you appreciate utilitarianism and looking at the consequences of actions and how it affects people and so on, right? Now, consequentialists look at what happens after the action. What this action is committed, what's the outcome? And then we'll assess that outcome. And that's how we know how to judge the action. Is it a good action? Is it a bad action? Now, Kantians do something very different. They look at what happens before the action. You can describe it like that. They look at the motivation or the reason for the action. So let's go back again to how utilitarian or how consequentialist moral deliberation works, right? So let's talk about things related to famine or hunger, right? So how do rule utilitarians reason? Okay, what rule will we adopt regarding charitable giving? Donating to feeding programs, UNICEF, World Vision, and things like that. How do we know what rule to adopt on that? Well, one systematic way to go about it is to enumerate all possibilities. What are the possibilities, and can we rank them? And can we identify the best? And that's how moral deliberation works under the consequentialist perspective. Good enough is not acceptable. You have to go for the best option. So one way to go about this is, what rule do we have about charitable giving? One rule that we can have is, well, the one that seems to be already in place, that people don't examine, but they automatically follow it. What's that rule? The rule is charitable giving is good, but it's not required. It's morally optional. So if you hear about people starving in East Timor or in remote parts of the country, remote parts of the Philippines, communities that are very distant from you, people you have never met, people you will never meet, they're hungry, and there are people who are collecting donations to feed them. Should you give? What's the rule for that? The ordinary rule is you can give, it's good, but if you don't give, there's nothing wrong, right? And then Peter Singer comes up with that example based on the shallow pond, and he tries to give us, he gives us a powerful argument for a different rule. Well, actually, here we're considering two rules, and the rule for Singer is we must give when the cost to us is comparatively minor and the impact on someone else is morally significant. So if we only have 20 pesos or 10 pesos or even 2 pesos and somebody is raising money so that they can install a deep well pump in a remote community, I just got cut off. Can somebody tell me kung saan tayo nagtapos o kung ano nangyari sa atin? Ano yung nakuha nyo? Can you hear me?
Ma'am, yung kay Peter Singer po.
Okay, salamat. Salamat. Okay. No, mag-message din si Cedric. Yung kay Peter Singer. Okay, biglang nawala kayo. Hindi ko alam kung I was swearing for a while. I hope, well, anyway, what's done is done. If it was recorded or if you heard it, yun. Kasi biglang nawala yung window. Hindi ko alam kung ano nangyari. Anyway, we're back. And I hope this is working now. Okay. So, Kantian moral deliberation. I will share my screen again because it was unshared. Okay. Tapos, okay. All right. So, Singer was having this rule where charitable giving is not optional because if you don't give, there's something wrong. So that you should give when the cost to you is minor. I think I was talking about an example connected to a deep well pump. So usually you can have small contributions from a lot of people for even as low as 2 pesos. And then for a remote community, that will be enough to buy and install a deep well pump so that they have access to clean drinking water, so that the people there don't get sick from drinking water that's not clean. Now, if you're a utilitarian, you reason like that. You try to enumerate all the possible rules to adopt, and you look at the consequences of those rules. You look at the arguments for changing the rule, and then you try to go for the happiness maximizing option. So Kantian moral deliberation doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's not exhaustive or demanding in that it asks you for all options and to rank all options and to go for the option that's the best. It's not like that. It looks at the motivation for the action. So it doesn't look at the result. It looks at why the action is being done. So Kantians can actually have different judgments for an action that has the same outcome. So in that sense, they look at something else. So I'll give a concrete example. I'll give a concrete example that connects to one recording in module 8, right? But you don't have to listen to that or see that yet. To understand what I'm about to discuss. Okay. Medyo famine, hunger problem rin. Isipin natin, one day you're walking down the street, on the sidewalk, you see a child who appears to be very hungry and who is asking you to give her food. She looks very thin. Your guess is that she's malnourished and she seems to be miserable because she hasn't eaten, and she tells you she wants food. Now you have some food in your bag. It's not a lot, but it has some nutritional value. Huwag na natin i-specify kung ano. So you have food and you give it to the child. Yun yung action. You give the child food. Now, the Kantians will not deliberate on all possible rules or all possible actions for you. The Kantian will look at what's the reason, what's the motivation for giving. So the Kantian will say, did you give food to the hungry child because you realize that if you do this, people will see and you will have a good reputation, and it's good to have a good reputation in your community, to be viewed as a person who helps hungry children. That's beneficial for you, and that's why you help. So same act, you hand out the food, the piece of food in your bag, you give it to the child. So first reason. Second reason is you give food to the child because you feel very bad. You know, there's emotional pain seeing a hungry and suffering child right in front of you. It feels bad. Masakit sa kalooban na nandyan sa harap mo, mukhang gutom na gutom, mukhang nahihirapan siya talaga. If you give the child food and the child smiles and or the child says thank you, the emotional pain goes away. It makes you feel good, right? And then you're so the motivation is pity. Third possibility is there might be pity in there, but your motivation to give is not to relieve the pity or not to get rid of the emotional pain that you have inside you, but you give because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's what anyone in that situation should do. And if you're in the place of the child, that's what you want other people to do. And if other strangers are passing by or there are other streets and there are other hungry children, it's what should be done. It's only right. It's something that Kantians will say is universalizable. That's the correct reason for action. So notice for Kantians, what matters is to do the right thing for the right reason. For Kantians, there's something undesirable about doing the right thing for the wrong reason. So notice the person who gave out of self-interest for reputation and the person who gave food to the child to get rid of emotional pain in herself, right? On the Kantian's view, there's something problematic going on there, right? So we will see here that Kantian moral deliberation works differently. It works differently. In one sense, it's less demanding. You don't need a lot of time to calculate, to enumerate, to rank. But in another sense, Kantian moral deliberation is more ambitious than consequentialist moral deliberation, right? And I will discuss this by telling you about the vision, the difference in the vision or the goal of the Kantian and the utilitarian, right? So we have another point here and another quotation from Honora O'Neill. I'm going to read it again, and then I'm going to explain. So the point is, what we have at the top, in another sense, Kantian moral deliberation is more ambitious than consequentialist moral deliberation, right? So less demanding but more ambitious. Why is it more ambitious? For utilitarians, paternalistic imposition of certain forms of aid and development assistance need not be wrong and may even be required. But for Kantians, who think that beneficence should secure others' possibilities for autonomous action, the case for paternalistic imposition of aid or development without recipients' involvement must always be questionable. So what is this about? What is this about? A lot depends on the word there, paternalistic or paternalism, right? So one question that is critical to notice is, why do we help? Why do we help? Why do we help the needy? If you ask the utilitarian, bakit sila tumutulong? Bakit gusto ni Peter Singer magbago yung pagtingin natin sa mga donasyon? Bakit? Madali lang. They want to get rid of suffering and they want to create more happiness. So the point of helping, the point of development assistance, if you're building a community, is you want to get rid of their suffering and you want to create pain. You want to get rid of pain and you want to create happiness or welfare, right? But for the Kantian, the answer is different. Why do they want to help? So why do you want to help the hungry child? Why do you want to help someone who is affected by the pandemic, who lost their job? Why do you want to help someone who was badly affected by floods? Right? Bakit mo sila tinutulungan? The Kantian's answer is not to promote welfare, right? And that's not because they're against welfare. The Kantians say we want to help the needy and the vulnerable so that we can get rid of their vulnerability and their neediness. So we want to help them so that they can stand up on their own feet, and we don't have to help them anymore. That's the Kantian vision. So what's the ideal society, or what's the ideal community as far as the utilitarian is concerned? It is something similar to what I showed you earlier, which is I gave you that link on happiness economics or happiness state, or the surveys every year around the world. The happiest countries are welfare states. It's not a surprise. Welfare is another term for happiness. So these are places where people have access to healthcare, to free education, public transportation is excellent and almost free, and people have access to opportunity across the board, right? Where does that all come from? It comes from taxes. Taxes are very high in welfare states. But for people in those countries, it's worth the price because it produces happiness for people. Do Kantians have something against welfare? Do Kantians have something against happiness? No. Right? The answer is no. But Kantians are against producing happiness in a way that creates dependency. So they think there's something wrong if you just promote welfare, but you sacrifice people's independence and autonomy. And this is why Kantians are against paternalism. So in the next slide, I will explain what paternalism means. I have several definitions. We'll begin with the first one that comes from me. I think this is the most intuitive way to introduce this concept, especially if it's new to you. Paternalism is inappropriate parenting behavior. Paternalism is trying to parent someone who is not a child, right? So for instance, an employer or the government interferes with the life of a working person. So an employee. So he is not a minor, not vulnerable, not disabled, or not experiencing problems like illness. So he's fully capable. He's working. He's earning more than enough money for himself, and maybe he has a family, so he earns enough money for his family. So he's okay. He's happy enough, right? But the employer and the government say, wait a minute, you're earning a good amount of money now, but maybe you're not saving enough. Maybe you have problems with self-control. Maybe you have problems with foresight or managing your financial investments. So we're going to help you. How are we going to help you? We're going to take part of your salary. Automatically, we're going to take it from you. You cannot spend it. And then we're going to invest it and put it all together. So by the time you retire, or 20, 25 years from now, you have a retirement fund, right? So this could, if done properly, without corruption and efficiently, this can produce welfare. It means that this working person will not experience the pain of arriving at retirement age and not having a pension fund, right? But this is paternalistic in the sense that you're trying to do something to someone who doesn't really need or want interference, right? So here's another definition of paternalism from the Stanford Encyclopedia. It's written by the philosopher who writes about paternalism a lot. His name is Dworkin. So we'll read the parts that are in red. Paternalism is the interference of a state or an individual with another person against their will and defended or motivated by a claim that the person interfered with will be better off or protected from harm. Right? So why are Kantians against paternalism? Because it inhibits autonomy or freedom. If the person who if the employee that we're talking about is able to make decisions on how much to save up, whether to spend all his salary right now and not to leave anything for later, and he gets hurt by that, That's on him because he's old enough and strong enough and rational enough to make his own mistakes and, more importantly, learn from his own mistakes, right? So another definition of paternalism, this time coming from Simon Blackburn, and it really clarifies what the problem of Kantians with paternalism is, I think, although in this definition, Blackburn is not necessarily referring to Kantian principles. So this part of the definition says, paternalist forms of patronage, gift-giving, charitable involvement, provision of amenities and institutions has frequently had the function of disguising naked relationships of domination. For instance, for example, between capitalists and their workers, husbands and wives, or colonialists and colonized. So it can happen that aid, assistance, development, sabi natin sa Tagalog, yung pagtulong, pwedeng ibinibigay mo para patuloy na maging umaasa na lang yung tinutulungan mo. Para sa mga Kantian, mali yun. Mali yun. Hindi ka dapat tumulong na tinuturuan mo lang sila na humingi ng tulong palagi. Dapat yung pagtulong mo, tumulong ka sa paraan na tatayo sila sa sarili nilang paa, na pagkatapos mo silang tulungan, kaya na nilang tulungan ng sarili nila. Tsaka kaya na rin nilang tulungan ng ibang tao. So that's what Kantian's ideal society or community is like. It's not just a place where everybody is happy. It's a place where everybody is a grown-up and is independent and is able to be self-governing, right? So sometimes people have a problem with using their own freedom properly. So some governments act like nannies to their citizens. So sometimes the paternalistic government in some countries, we'll talk about a concrete example in the module next week. Some countries treat citizens like children. And sometimes, minsan, ito yata yung hindi nahahalata ng mga Pilipino na hinahanap nila. Kaya pagka may leader, ang turing nila, magulang. But why does the president have to be a mother or a father? The citizens are not babies. They should not be babied. They should not be treated as somebody who's controlled by others. So this is the ambition of Kantian deontology, that we have a community where people are treated as adults and are not controlled and allowed to be as autonomous as they could be. And they can live together harmoniously, respecting each other's autonomy. That's the ambition of Kantian deontology.